Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody. This is Peter Joseph, February 25th, 2015. Hope everybody's doing okay out there and preparing for ZDay. And if you're one of the aliens listening in the distant future to this archive and humanity is no longer around, just note that we are the people that tried. I'm going to be slamming through a bunch of questions, picking up where I left off last week. And just to note, a lot of people are posting statements, and statements are great, but I really can't just read a whole statement, and I hate having to shortchange these things. I have to shortchange them anyway, just to preserve time. So I appreciate statements on the post, but I'm not going to read them. So if you have a great statement, put it around a question. You'll have higher odds when I answer it. All right, here we go. Number one, Dear Peter, can you elaborate a little on the Localized Solutions Project? This is a project that wasn't very clear in the Zeitgeist movement defined. We are planning on starting it here in Greece. Our plan is to essentially create a guide in a wiki format on how people can gain self-sufficiency and cut down their household expenses and the like. Is that close to how you envisioned it? Oh, I could see it being used that way, that's for sure. The Localized Solution Project was paired in with the Global Redesign Institute and the Collaborative Design System. These are three loosely knit ideas to further progress technological development in this kind of networked systems concept. The Global Redesign Institute is a macro approach, as was described in the book, to taking all the terrain of the planet and redesigning macro land configurations where energy is, how you can utilize traffic patterns, how you can create the best infrastructure for a given city. In the back of my mind, I imagine this could be taken on locally by chapters, or it could be done independently by anyone that's of that interest in engineering and city planning. So you could take, say, for example, the city of Los Angeles, and you strip away everything that's been done, and you look at where all the energy sources is, look at how the natural terrain works, and eventually you're going to build out a logic as to what the most efficient arrangement, based on current understandings and based on current applications of technology, how it would unfold and make literally the most efficient and productive environment, obviously adding to efficiency to such an extent that it further compounds the argument we don't need to use the market system. Just to go through these, the collaborative design system was actually the programming work to try and get the input structure together, where the network of people that come together to create goods and basically the R&D, design, and engineering stuff. This is the hub of that, and this is to create that infrastructure basically through algorithmic programming. That was very loosely described in the book. It's a very difficult subject, parameters of which need a larger order group of people to figure out. There's a lot of people have criticized that section with good reason, because it's just there to show the beginnings of this calculation, so to speak. And that's what will replace, of course, the price calculation problem, or the price calculation mechanism, the price mechanism that is so heavily held up as the ultimate defense of market economics, specifically in the Austrian school and the like. Now we get to the Localized Solution Project. Well, if the GRI is a macro industrial economic project, then the Localized Solutions Project is a micro. What that means is that in the macro term, you're going to have, say, a maglev train that shoots across one place to another with a specific design and engineering that goes into it. And that's where the Localized Solution Project comes in, because you're actually going to think about what comprises that micro engineering of the maglev train. And it's a systems relationship. So you look at the larger order system of what these trains are doing and how they work as a network, and their efficiency with energy, with people, with speed, with preservation of resources and their design, and that pulls right down to the microsystem of the actual design itself. So in a way, they're kind of connected. You really can't have one without the other. But so anyone out there that has an idea for anything of a micro invention, say, I don't know, a speaker, anything, I'm in my office, so I'm looking at my speaker. You bring that, you can create a CAD model, you bring it into the system. You know, a great loose example is a 3D warehouse. I do a lot of 3D stuff these days, and you can go to Google and they have a 3D warehouse, and you download these three-dimensional designs. They're not industrial, they're not engineering designs, obviously. But imagine if that was the case, but they were actually schematic designs with all of the science built into it, all the engineering specs in that. And you have to know the language, you have to know what you're doing. But a completely open source engineering platform for microsystems, such as a computer monitor, computers themselves, or anything you look around, even a car, it could be considered a microsystem, really. And that relates to GRI. So, you know, back to your point, would it work to cut down household expenses using technology? Well, that's one way to think of it. I mean, the network systems use reuse concept, where you look at, say, a kitchen, instead of having all these random parts you buy from novel companies and proprietary technology, you design the entire kitchen into one. It's basic common sense where all the plates fit perfectly into the dishwasher. The dishwasher can actually elevate these plates and put them back into position. Everything is perfectly set up to work as one solid system. And that applies just about anything with respect to saving money and as well, because those things do go hand in hand. So I'll leave it at that. I could ramble on a whole bunch about that, but you're a little off as far as its practical application, but it could easily be used that way. If anyone wants to put an open source design of something that is really, really efficient and people see that and they want to apply it themselves. I've also been looking into the idea of starting the first automated restaurant. It's been in the back of my mind. I have no money, but I wonder if one day some investors could get together to do this. And I went just out of curiosity to see about the bar systems. You walk into a bar. By the way, I'm not advocating drinking a lot of alcohol. But those of us that work in the movement tend to drink more than we probably should for obvious reasons. But the automated bar systems, it's probably the first step because it's a pure, simple chemistry and mechanics. It's not difficult to set up. People on YouTube have these things already created. I was shocked to see the do-it-yourself homemade bars and that's really promising. In fact, I have to admit, YouTube and people's just self-propelled will to do stuff and invent, it's truly incredible. In a lot of ways, it serves as a microcosm and gesture of what's possible if a platform like the Local Solutions Project was put together. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, or I'll keep rambling. Next question: Any news regarding the Global Redesign Institute? Is there anything the TZM community can do to speed this project up? I have to apologize personally for that because I get a lot of inquiries about that. And the issue is time. And the issue is also financing and money. I hate to say it, but there's such an intense, of all those projects listed, that's probably the most intense one as far as what's required to create the platform. I've said this before, and I apologize about being a broken record and why it hasn't happened. As a volunteer organization, it becomes trying, and I'm trying to do as much as I can. But I have a very concentrated need to want to be involved in that personally. I really am passionate about it. But it hasn't quite happened yet. Lots of inquiries, lots of people in the database as far as possible help, and lots of general technological reference, because there are plenty of systems that have been created by other institutions, even government institutions, that have a lot of this data that's required. It's a matter of starting to funnel it in and doing it. But yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about that at the ZDay event in Berlin as well. So anything the community can do to speed up this project, I think initiative has to be made to create some kind of open platform for communication of ideas. The goal was to get the initial site up with such a platform. If I had an extra 5-10 grand, I would put that out and start doing that, but it's just not there. This is the kind of thing nonprofits come into play with, and there's been some discussion behind the scenes of generating nonprofits for these particular projects, and I think that's probably going to have to happen like that. So I apologize there hasn't been any progress on that. It will happen. In fact, many internally have known that I've been talking about dedicating the majority of my time to such a project and basically not involving myself with the Zeitgeist movement directly, removing myself from the administration and all the general maintenance of it, handing that off to another group, and then focusing only on these design initiatives. That's been my goal for like 2 or 3 years now, but general survival and the like is inhibited. So I will keep you posted for sure. And your very question motivates me to really bring some of these groups together and start to get the first stages down. A lot of work has been done, but it's just not up there yet. Next question. Okay, this is a quasi-statement question. I'm going to break this up as best I can, or I have broken it up as best I can. The powers that be, in the interest of self-preservation, might use their influence to mobilize our moving toward a hyper-artificial economy to further solidify their hierarchical status, standard of living, comfort, and familiarity. Can this not be achieved with propaganda and by illegalizing any disruptive technologies that are too freedom-warranting, like decentralized production? That is the first part of your question, so let me answer that. And the answer, of course, is yes. They meaning the business government collusion that is the socioeconomic system, could easily do whatever it wants, But if the public stands their ground, of course, and understands the relevance of this technology in the larger order, hence the purpose of the movement in part, then it won't have long-term. Won't have a long-term effect. I believe in Florida they outlawed off-the-grid living. Hopefully, I'm correct on that. That was an article I read about 6 months ago that they made it basically illegal, that you can't be off the grid. There's some kind of safety precaution, which is a pretty rough step if you really think about if that took hold across the world. That means that they would be locked into the established energy structures. And with the advent of solar panels and the like, and the numerous homes that are already completely off the grid, totally, but usually they have the money to do it. It's scary to see how that kind of legislation could move forward. But with all the sustainability issues out there, anything that relates to furthering efficiency really is going to be held up and understood probably pretty rapidly by the general population as it begins to, of course, try to reconcile this clash between labor and technological automation. So there's a learning curve, and it's going to be really interesting how things unfold. But I agree. And the only thing you can do is as what anyone has ever done, and that's fight legislation that works to preserve the establishment, which is an ongoing battle. And that's what everyone should be doing, by the way, in the short term. I mean, you have to do that. You have to continue to work against these symptoms that are perpetual. Moving on to the next question. Also, a universal basic income seems like a perfect bridge to this even faker yet sustainable economy, decentralized currency, the elimination of infinite growth. It wouldn't matter, right? A universal basic income would still just be another mechanism of class war, structural classism. Yes, there is a significant but minor in relevance to larger order change to apply universal basic income, and it's mainly to get people out of abject poverty and increase public health. So the the positives of this would be people's alleviation of mental and physical disorders as they relate to class imbalance psychologically, meaning their self-worth. I'm sure people read that 1 in 5 suicides are currently linked to unemployment. And that doesn't even bring out the spectrum, at least not really. It's a part of it, but the full spectrum of what's called structural violence, which kills about 18 million people a year conservatively, that consists of a whole another slew of things that relate to poverty. But if people aren't familiar with these psychological and physiological repercussions of low socioeconomic status, I mean, meaning outside of just the realm of not getting your basic needs met, like nutrition, which has an obvious ramification. Please read the work of Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett and Dr. Robert Sapolsky and a number of other people that have looked into this issue. It's could be a tremendous boost for public health to have universal basic income. That said, you still are not going to alleviate all the problems of cyclical consumption, increased elitism, power consolidation, overall inequality on the upper tier, and all the other fundamental problems with the system itself when it comes to sustainability. Ecological destruction, I mean, none of that will be alleviated by universal basic income. So keep that in mind. But it's one of those necessary in the system steps that should be promoted. Next question is actually a two-part question related to veganism and animal rights. My questions are, number one, wouldn't the necessary value shift required for an RBE world suggest embracing the veganism ideal as a prerequisite? Prerequisite for the movement or the future participation in RBE? It's very dangerous to think about prerequisites when we barely can keep a group of people doing anything active consistently, even though we've been relatively successful. But in proportion to what should have been done and what can be done, the movement slugs along and has its work. And when people come up to me and they say, "Well, everyone should support this idea. This is the new scientific finding. You're an idiot if you don't support it," I can't help but kind of gawk at the ignorance of it. I mean, I hate to say that everyone should come into the movement believing whatever they want. That's of course ridiculous. But if our goal is to actually make a dent in what's happening in society at the root-based level, getting people to understand the social system, then things like veganism or atheism or anything that has to do with a controversial standing that alienates people and forces more division than it creates unity most likely needs to be rethought in how it's communicated. There's a large gradient of education. I will speak for myself. I do not put much gravity in veganism. As a person who's mostly vegan, I don't look at others with any judgment on the issue because, yes, there are much larger concerns at hand. You could spend all this time converting everyone to veganism, and one massive nuclear exchange by rogue powers will wipe out all of that work in about an hour. As stated numerous times, the Zeitgeist movement is a big picture movement. And I don't put anyone down for advocating veganism in general, because it's just like advocating someone should be driving an electric car. It's just like advocating somebody should be using regeneration systems and being off the grid with their home. It's just like advocating, again, universal basic income to improve standards of life that can help families be less stressed out and stop the spectrum of social disorder that slowly begins to breed out. I could go on and on about all of these inner system changes that can happen. But if you have read all the Zeitgeist movement materials and you still think that veganism is going to change everything, I'm sorry, you're wrong. That's not what's going to happen. There is a lot of pollution happening through animal agriculture, and there's a lot of environmental destruction. However, when you stack all the other issues up next to it, you begin to see it's minor with respect to the larger order system problems that in fact underscore this constant interest to consume animals at an ever-increasing rate. In the cyclical consumption, sickness of vanity, the fur industry, there's a lot that can be said on it. I'm going to jump to your second question, which is basically the same thing. Is it an intelligent position for TZM to treat veganism as a peripheral issue when it is one of the most important an individual can make to reduce their environmental footprint and foster compassion and empathy for animals and other humans? I would say, personally, yes, it is an intelligent position for the reasons I've listed, namely the strategy of keeping people together and focusing towards a common end. I don't know of anyone that wants to hurt animals, and I also don't think that people naturally are going to be nicer to each other in some abstraction where we are more compassionate towards humans because we're more compassionate towards animals. If that's a psychological view that you have, maybe that holds through. I see so many people that eat meat that simultaneously love their pets more than people, frankly, and of course are just as compassionate towards people as they can be, given the warring social system we have. So I question that transference of values that you're pointing out. And as far as the environmental footprint, it's a big deal. I've already stated that. So you make your own decision. No one out there is saying to any chapter, oh, you can't talk about veganism or promote veganism. All we're saying is that let's be nice on the subject and let's be open and realize that people are in different stages, and let's not shame anybody for these values. Life feeds on life, as I've said before, and you're going to end up with a morally relativistic continuum the farther you go down any of these arguments. And at some point, you're not going to win, because you have to make a decision. You have to make a decision about what constitutes sacrifice or harvesting because of some excuse that you've made up and what doesn't. So keep that in mind. Next question. My question, it's a selfish one. However, I'd like to get your thoughts on it. I'm at a stage in my life where normal people get into relationships and start looking out for future goals with respect to buying houses, families, getting married, working 6 days a week, and so on. What's your opinion on this hard-working mentality young adults go through for these goals? And number two, how does one maintain a relationship or even entertain the idea of having one with someone that doesn't have these values? It feels like 99.99% of women on this planet are so conditioned with fashion advertising and Sex and the City culture. I wouldn't want to spend my life with any of them. Yeah, I feel you. I'm not really one for relationship advice, but clearly, if you intend to have any kind of serious relationship with anybody and you're serious about your work, whatever that may be, you want to have some kind of shared value system. I say opposites attract, but I think if you're going to push forward with trying to promote counterculture ideas of this nature, you're going to want some kind of support. I mean, if the person you're around a lot doesn't support it or thinks you're crazy, which I've had that experience, then it's not going to be positive. You'll end up picking sides and choosing loyalties. It's frustrating. as far as the fashion culture and the like. You have to be compassionate with it. My new thing these days is I look at everyone that's doing things that I don't agree with or even abhor. I don't get mad anymore. I do. I take that back. I get plenty mad. But when I'm done being mad, I collect myself and I take a different view. And that is, I look at everyone like they're children. And this might sound hideously condescending, but I'm going to be dead honest. It saves you a lot of grief when you think this way because you can't get mad at children's behavior or ideas because they're children. And that's, as odd as it may sound, as a coping mechanism, it works really well. And you might be wrong. You might be proven wrong by these people in the future. But it still works really well to keep a balanced focus and not get apprehensive. In other words, it's easier to be compassionate and understanding and even more vulnerable if you take that stance. And then you can break through a little bit when you try to talk to them. So, if I haven't made a complete ass out of myself with that statement, I'll continue by saying that when it comes to those that have a high vanity lifestyle, and I'm talking both sexes here, it doesn't matter. You're really looking at a condition of insecurity or a condition of competition, because that's why people behave this way. And they have to, remember, all social reality is from an external perspective. We define ourselves entirely by the world around us. I know we don't think we do, and I don't mean that in the sense of superficiality, like, oh, am I better than her? Am I prettier than him or whatever? It's because you literally, all your ideas and thoughts and self-orientation comes from the world around you. It's just the nature of the condition. And if you understand that and you see why people start to get very vanity oriented and are so manipulated by advertising, it just makes sense. As I said in one of my Culture Declines, advertising is there to manipulate that social element for the gain of others. It's taking what really is a positive, communicative, group mind, empathic, mirror neuron reality, and it's twisting it to make you feel insecure. And that's what this culture has done a tremendously good job with doing. So yeah, that's a slight deviation. So coming back to your point, I share the alienation, I share the cognitive dissonance, the idea of getting property and getting your job and elevating to the highest managerial position, having the 2.5 kids, and all those things that come about with status and what the culture has generated is frustrating for those of us that are seen outside of the box. I occasionally go to, say, Hollywood, since I live in Los Angeles, and it's like a freak show, man. I don't know where I am. Might as well be on another planet. And I drive around this city, and it's just one big vat of inefficiency from top to bottom. The problem with understanding and learning is that you seem to have an inverse relationship to happiness. So keep that in mind. And at the same time, know that you have to play the game. So don't just shy away from opportunity that's present in this system, such if you get an inheritance and you can buy property and you can save money by buying this property through predictable positive investments. You need to do those things. No one should just run off and avoid this system and assume that it's just going to all work out for the best. You have to maintain your own health. And to do that, you got to play both sides of this game, the transitional side and the established side. So anyway, I hope that helps. Next question. I will answer this very briefly since it's not really a movement question. Hi, Peter. Can you give a quick update on Interreflections? Yep, I'm still shooting for the end of 2015. It's a very unique process, and it's going to be a very experimental work. I would like to point out that there's a tendency historically to associate anything I do in media privately, meaning these independent productions, whether it's the Zeitgeist film trilogy or Culture in Decline, as some equivocal representation of the movement. And this is very dangerous. And I really hope people can get beyond this when it comes to Interreflections, because I'm taking a very, very different approach with this. So anyway, it's coming along, and I appreciate those that are continuing to pay attention to its development. To make matters worse, I am also writing a book for a publisher, and that deadline is also at the end of this year. But everything's on pace. Next question. Peter, we have the problem of apathetic robots in our society who are happy just to wake up every morning and see everything the same and business as usual. Can we ever expect them to fully understand the magnitude of our problems due to their background, indoctrination, and biases? I personally feel that this might be an impossible task to hope for under such an irrational, illogical environment as we currently live in. Yeah, welcome to the machine. One thing that's interesting about human satisfaction is that it is very relative, and it's absolutely contingent upon the condition. Someone might hear that and think, well, then how do we draw any lines? Well, the better way to think about it is actually, if that's the case, then what does it take to find that equilibrium in a culture that's actually trying to be sustainable? I think that's the new value system that's coming up. This is an aside, but when people respect each other for their minimalism or their strategy of life, as opposed to decadence and materialism, values shift and goals shift, and happiness becomes equated to different standards. I think that's a really important part, because there's a subculture out there that really does believe in this old economic theory of human dissatisfaction and basically human irrationality, and that will never be happy. And the point I bring that up is because what you're saying is that you have people that literally are probably doing quite poorly in some cases, with a lot of debt, overworked, and yet they still would say they're happy. Jump back to the days where there's no electricity. Is just because someone doesn't have electricity back then, does that mean that they wouldn't be happy? We would often say that electricity is almost a human right at this stage. And if someone didn't have electricity today, given all the benefits and the way the world works now, that they probably wouldn't be happy. That would be a kind of deprivation. But back then, when things were equalized in that condition, there was hence no benchmark to decide that somebody was in a poorer place and should feel more inferior. By the way, I'm speaking generally. Obviously, there's been social stratification, lots of things throughout history that compound this psychological neuroses, feelings of helplessness, and that huge school of psychological study that shows that when you are deemed oppressed, when you feel lower in status, you behave as such. And obviously, depression, anxiety, and all those things come into play to affect your public health and happiness. But I hope you see my point, is that it's completely relativistic, and it's all based on the way society is looking at itself and the degrees of social respect and admiration and honor and all of those positive social effects, the degrees to which they're prevalent. Oh man, so much could be said on that subject. That's just enormous. Going back to your question, because I don't have time to expand too much, you need to show people that life can be better in those circumstances. And at the same time, showing how their complicit behavior in this system actually injures others. I mean, the network structure, we've talked about this a lot with structural violence, the gaming strategy of this system that literally sets up the musical chairs phenomenon, if you will, that pushes people to the side, that takes things away from people. Someone might be very happy that works, for example, in a bank somewhere. They make a decent salary and they happen to be in the repossessions department, where a guy buys a house and pays 99% of it off, suddenly loses all forms of income, can't pay his bill. He's already paid off 99%, but the bank still takes his entire house away from him, full value. That is criminal. But if the person's not aware that that's criminal and they're so locked into the system, they would be happy, because that's just what their job is. So you can see the multidimensional elements of communication and education in this. In fact, as one more point, in the last interview I did with Abby Martin on RT promoting ZDay, I made the point regarding activism and change, and I said, people don't know what they want. And that's a very bold statement. I thought about that in hindsight, because most people would hear that and they get kind of angry, like, oh, how dare you tell me that I don't know what I want? But it's true. No one knows what they want until they're presented with the idea. No one can magically come up with all the life-improving options out there that have never been thought of before. A person living in the middle of the jungle in a small tribe has no idea what a cell phone could possibly be. And in that, I don't mean that just to promote material culture, obviously, but larger order systems awareness regarding sustainability, larger order general improvements of life and public health. And people don't know how much better their lives could be if, for example, we move to a natural law resource-based economy. So you have to explain to them how much different and fulfilling and healthy their world could be if these changes were made. Next question. Could we use a system similar to direct democracy to make decisions in the movement, just as a tool for better communication and accumulation of ideas? I understand that TZM is a leaderless movement, but there are decisions that need to be decided on the official TZM level, things that really cannot be answered by members through the scientific method at this time. Good question. This kind of stuff has been brought up for years, and the global chapter meetings pretty much are the hub of this consensus reaching, and there is basically a form of direct democracy already. It's denoted on the website. If it's utilized properly is another matter. You also have to think about what a direct democracy is going to apply to in general, meaning where would you apply it and how detailed do you want it to go. If someone writes a lecture for the movement, should that lecture be posted online for random folks to come in and vote and maybe even change it before it ever goes to a podium or is presented live? What about the media project? Should people vote on what gets uploaded there? What about the blog? The blog has a group of people that are trusted. They've been with the movement for years. And this can apply to anything content-wise, anything that gets uploaded, anything that gets reported, anything that's said. This isn't the kind of movement where people are jockeying for any kind of position whatsoever, so we take what we can get. And when it comes to chapters, which is probably the most critical point of this, there is a consensus process already in place, and people just talk it out. It's not necessary to have some kind of extended bureaucracy. When it comes to projects that are to be developed, that is a tremendously good idea for direct democracy. We need more projects, and those are submitted and evaluated. There was an idea, excuse me, to have a website that allowed people to submit their own projects and concepts towards the movement to see what the movement would get behind. And this was talked about for a while. I don't know what happened to that idea. I think it would be great. That's an excellent application of direct democracy. But as the movement exists in form, going back to your core point, the movement is patterned a specific way. It is what it is. You're not going to change, for example, the chapter structure. You're not going to vote out the chapter structure. If you did that, it wouldn't have the mirror of the original civil rights concept. It would change everything. You're not going to vote out the resource-based economy. If you did that, it wouldn't be the Zeitgeist movement. So the framework is set, the infrastructure is set, lots of tools are now available. It took years and years to get the simple infrastructure that we have now working fluidly. And of course, if you're in a chapter, it's the bottom-up chapter assessment and the presentation of ideas to keep this thing going and create more efficient modes of communication, because that's what this is all about. So it all exists in the chapters. And that really is embodying direct democracy, but it's doing it in a social way, not a numerical way where you try to assess random people that have no necessary accountability, may have just came in for 2 seconds and then they go to a computer screen and hit a button to vote for something, and they could be gone the next day and have no concern about anything. The quality control of people that are in the movement comes from their actual activity, and that's an important point as well. There are no citizens of the Zeitgeist movement, and for better or for worse, it's one of the most open movements in the world. Anyone can come in and out of this stuff and claim loyalty or detract loyalty. And that's another complicated subject. How do you decide who's dedicated enough to the movement to value their opinion? And that opens up a whole new can of worms. Okay, I'm now on the second forum solicitation for February 25th, starting from the top. Peter, in some of your last interviews, you spoke briefly about guaranteed universal basic income. What are your thoughts on this? I described that earlier in this broadcast, so please go back and listen. Next question. Peter, don't you think that veganism may be one of the most difficult things for people to overcome in the biggest transition of all, which is value shifting? Well, I'll put the context more broadly. Overcoming current habits, customs, and values is everything. It's a revolution of values out there. We are so locked into certain neurological patterns, if you will, with the way that we associate things, with the way we draw feedback and satisfaction, the way our endorphins run, what we get excited about, it all based on the support we get and, of course, the social system itself and what it reinforces. As far as the vegan issue, again, I think it's more appropriate to say that moving away from the agricultural behaviors that are provably the most inefficient is a very positive thing. And each person is going to have their threshold at this point in time in culture as to how far they're willing to sacrifice their customs in order to make that happen. So all value shifts are going to be relative, obviously increasing over time, especially over generational time. But once again, please understand, I take a broader picture view. I'm not promoting, quote, veganism as an institution to anyone. It's up to you if you find the need to make that decision. But that isn't what the Zeitgeist movement is about. It's a bigger picture view, and I'm sorry to those that don't understand that. Next question. this question is prefaced with a paragraph describing frustration surrounding market fundamentalism, the libertarian philosophy, and Austrian school stuff, and the idea that the market, left to its own devices, would create the highest level of efficiency and it would naturally weed out competitive corruption, so on and so forth. And yeah, I'm very, very familiar with this. I've had great frustration talking to people of this nature, and I've spent a good portion of at least 3 lectures debunking this idea from top to bottom. It's a completely narrow, truncated, categorically based system of thought of free trade, and the idea that you have voluntary exchange is even more ludicrous. The example I'll give, just to perpetuate a small rant, is you have a woman on one side of a counter at a pawn shop and the pawn shop owner on the other. The woman hands off a ring to the pawn shop owner in exchange for money, and then the exchange happens. And that's the snapshot. The ring is handed over and the money is handed over, and oh, it must be a voluntary exchange. That exchange itself serves the betterment of the person on each side of the counter. And that little snapshot is what's used as defense of a non-coercive type of market economy, which is mesmerizingly stupid if you know anything about systems. Because what if that woman's ring is actually her dead husband's wedding ring? And the dead husband died a week before from cancer, and that husband was also the one that was the breadwinner. And there's no state support worth anything because she has 5 kids she has to feed. She now has no money, no savings. They spend all the money in a corrupt system on the cancer treatment. He's dead. There's no income. She has to eat and feed her kids. So she exchanges her wedding ring for money. Is that voluntary trade? See, that snapshot, in truth, it is voluntary trade in the sense of the snapshot itself. But that's what makes it so comedic, because it ignores all external pressures. So needless to say, I'm well aware of all of that. Your question is, if various monetary reform efforts were implemented, such as stopping government borrowing, removing the ability of derivatives to rape housing food industries, and stopping fractional reserve lending, et cetera, do you think the concept of a market is still completely futile? Or do you think that there could be some type of intermediate area, which is what he's getting at? Okay, so is it possible to have some kind of market system that isn't so corrupt? That's the question. And the answer really is no, because as history has shown, any attempt to collar this system, any kind of legislation to really remove the most cancerous of this disease, remove the tumors, as it were, to chop the tumors off, they just grow right back, unfortunately, and that's really the case. The stock market evolution is what I use in my lecture, Origins and Adaptations Part 2. I follow the train of thought of how a goods economy materialized, and then it evolved into a representative equity futures and derivatives economy where there's more money moving around and being made off of representative shares of companies and goods and commodities than there is in the normal economy. And as a former short-term stock trader myself, I was very enthralled by this for many, many years. That's an evolutionary problem. And I think even if you were able to pull back that stuff, it's still trying to push its way through. It's like a dam that's being held up by a bunch of guys with 2x4s, There's very low odds they're going to be able to hold this thing forever. And if you look at the history of legislation, such as the Glass-Steagall Act being repealed before the great 2007 banking crisis, which, of course, that act was put in place to protect against such things as what happened in the 2007-2008 banking crisis, which was really just repealed for monetary interest to further the possibility of economic exploitation and gain by commercial investment banks. You begin to see that you're fighting an uphill battle. So I don't promote that. I recommend, as a step-by-step process, doing anything we can to shut down the most cancerous of the institutions, again, chopping off those tumors. I would love to see the entire Wall Street investment apparatus completely removed from society, just history. There's no trading of anything in the external, no representative shares of anything. You go back to the original concept of investment, where a group of people get together, they put in money into a company, and they take percentages of the profits, and that's it. But does that mean it would stop there, even if you did that, even if somehow magically we did that? Nope. I think it would inch back into the constant sickness that is market trade and the pet rock syndrome, I call it, where it really doesn't even matter. It's the widget The whole thing's based on the widget. Doesn't matter what the widget does. And with that mentality, that is value, you're going to have these same problems arise over and over again. Okay, just a few minutes left. The next question is written in broken English. I'm going to try and paraphrase it. Regarding transition for a natural or resource-based economy, has the Zeitgeist movement evaluated any countries or cities of interest? By consensus, I think Nordic countries tend to have a more equal society and may be a good place to educate. I suppose they mean that we could have transition to Nordic countries more probabilistically. Okay, I'm sorry, friend, but I'm a little confused by the specifics of your question. There's always been talk about different areas that would be more prone to transition. Nordic countries actually is a good suggestion. It doesn't have as many resources available. I think a country that would push forward first would be small and resource intensive. They'd have lots of resources and they'd have advanced technology to make it work to be basically off the grid from globalization. That's my hypothesis about how it could unfold. But the Nordic countries, given their values already, yes, I could see how if they were able to override the pressures from the international community, which would be heavy for them to behave this way, then they definitely are probably the stepping stone in values to what we want to put forward. The next question is actually a set of 4. I'm going to quickly answer 3. 1, how would lands and regions be named in an RBE? I think the land masses could keep similar names just by tradition. All naming structures are arbitrary anyway. You identify regions in the most strategic way you can, so I think it'd actually be more specific, but you could pretty much keep the same basic architecture. It really wouldn't matter. Second question, could you explain what would happen if a person in RBEs decided to hoard things even though they have sharing and access? A decision would have to be made to define hoarding, some kind of standard, but it probably would be very, very obvious given, again, it's an access society, and that would be a kind of neuroses or mental illness. If you have a society where you're looking at things from a medical standpoint and irrational behaviors like that arise, then it becomes a psychiatric or a psychological phenomenon that needs to be addressed, just like you see with hoarders in the West that literally hoard or don't throw away anything that they own. Or you look at feral children that had suffered abuse and that were deprived greatly, and even many years after their release, they would get food and then hide it in their rooms. There's a story of a little girl named Jeannie that I featured in a lecture years ago. You should also remember that the culture today looks at everything from the standpoint of value. So hoarding makes sense in the world today. In a society that has no value of given goods, at least no exchange value, then there's just no logic for it. So any behavior of that nature would be regarded as a kind of mental illness, even though that might be an extreme distinction, and it would be addressed by the society in the same way anyone who has problems of that nature would be addressed. And the final question, would it be practical to categorize all objections to an RBE? I think what you mean is just block them together. That was done in the book. There's the prima facie fallacy set, and then there is the straw man fallacy set. And I pretty much put everything into those categories. You can go back to the book, which is, of course, if everyone doesn't know, the Zeitgeist Movement Defined. It's online for free, or you can get it at cost paperback. And it has a lot of that stuff in the opening chapters. Okay, I'm running out of time. I appreciate everybody, and I'll pick up where I left off whenever I come back to the radio show. Thank you all, and good luck. Talk to you later.